So this is going to be a sequel to the video I put out a few days ago, which has garnered quite a lot of reaction. Thanks very much for everybody that watched and commented. So that was the 20 greatest British bands of all time. And today I'm going to do the 20 best British bands of all time. Now, so this is still not necessarily my favourite bands. And how do we distinguish between the greatest and the best? I'm going to leave that to you to make up your own minds. But, you know, in that first video, I was very much looking at the canon and the sort of, you know, the critical consensus of the greatest. And often it's the case that, you know, the greatest albums, you know, the ones that have, as I explained it in the first video, you know, the biggest cultural import, the furthest influence, the fact that they were incredibly innovative, all these things. That was my agenda, really. And but you know, ask yourself, what, you know, when was the last time you spun a Yes record? Even a Beatles album. I've not played the Beatles for a long time. So yeah, the best British bands rather than the greatest. So I hope you enjoy the selection. So let's get started. Got quite a few to show. Not going to talk too much about each of them, but we'll sort of whiz through them. And I'm going to put them in alphabetical order because I got so sick of trying to work out an order. So I've gone and put them in alphabetical order. So yes, that might work or not, as the case may be. So let's have the Bee Gees and Spirits Have Flown, great disco album from, I think, 1978, which contains a couple of absolute belters. Tragedy, Too Much Heaven at the start of side one. Got to have the Bee Gees. I nearly didn't include them because of the whole thing about them being, either they were born in Australia or they emigrated to Australia, or they, I don't know, there was some Australian thing in the picture, wasn't there? Bebop Deluxe. Another thing I was going to call this video, I was going to call it Unique British Bands, and I guess that might be a different video, but you know, bands that have or had a very particular take, a very particular kind of spark of originality. Original British bands, you could even say, but I think Bebop Deluxe, see if we can get rid of the glare, would fit that bill with the brilliant guitar playing of Bill Nelson and his stream of consciousness songs, and there was something a bit sort of cultish about them and quirky and different. Same for this band, actually. Now, officially, you can only have the first 2 records by Cockney Rebel, because after this, Steve Harley broke the band up and they reformed, or he reformed them really as his backing band. But the first 2 albums, the self-titled debut and the second album, were really a band, even though Steve Harley was the leader and the songwriter. But again, very quirky, very original, great fun. A big influence on Britpop, I think, maybe on Blur. Bit of a cabaret thing going on. Again, very original. Didn't have a guitar player, had a violin player and a keyboard player instead, holding down most of the instrumental stuff. But Steve Harley, a great performer and a great lyricist and vocalist. So let's have them in. And how could I leave out this bunch? Showing their least successful record, but Dexy's Midnight Runners had a brilliant way with the tune. Great way that they kind of brought soul music back into the picture, really. This is their third album, which was a bit different. I thought I'd show this one because this is the one that completely flopped. But Kevin Rowland, a fantastic vocalist with a bit of a Marmite voice maybe, but certainly very individual, very talented, and some really gutsy songs and just, you know, great tunes. How could we not have, this is in the sleeve still, sorry. How could we not have Electric Light Orchestra? This is surely the greatest classical rock pop double album of all time. Ooh, I used the word greatest, sorry. Best. This is a band that I didn't include in my other video because I was thinking that they went a bit American in the 1970s, or a lot American in fact, but originally Fleetwood Mac were a British band, and I think of all those early British bands, they were the best. I think Peter Green was an amazing guitar player, and his songwriting was very original, quite different. You know, songs like The Green Man Alicia, they were not just standard 12-bar blues, they had something else going on. Okay, this bunch, I didn't include them in the greatest video, and in that I made a sort of half-assed justification for it. I put Yes and King Crimson in, didn't put Genesis in. I think because Genesis came a little bit later, and I think Yes and King Crimson were more seminal, but I think Genesis were quirkier than either of them, particularly the early albums with Peter Gabriel, that kind of arch humour that they had going on, and this sort of slightly sinister air And of course you had Peter Gabriel's amazing theatrical conceit on stage, you know, Fox's Head and all that stuff. You know, really, really great band, I think. One of the best bands. House Martins, complete contrast. Surely one of the best 80s tuneful pop bands with a bit more going on under the surface lyrically, some quite hard-hitting political lyrics, but disguised under this very nice, fluffy kind of musical accompaniment. Only 2 albums, got out while the going was good. This bunch, listening again to their records recently, and I'm going to do a video on them because I think the Human League were one of the best synth bands ever, and the first 2 albums where they were still doing that kind of cold synthy kind of sound was just really, really seminal, really. Later on, obviously, one of the best huge 80s pop albums of all time in Dare, but some really great tunes, and I just think they had a real quirky way with them. You know, they turned synth pop into something quite quirky and distinctive. I had the specials in the greatest video, Let's Have Madness in the best. Our House, one of the best 80s pop records of all time, and just an amazing greatest hits band. Love this record, and they're still around, of course. British institution that they are. One of the best pop bands of the 60s. You had The Move in their original incarnation, Birmingham band, and they went through some lineup changes and eventually morphed into ELO, but here they are in their original 60s splendour. This is one of my favourite compilations of all time. When I was about 16, I remember hankering after it. It was hanging on the wall in Moonlight Records in Wrexham, where I still go and buy records now to this day, actually. Yeah, I mean, some of the best pop tunes ever. Fire Brigade, Flowers in the Rain, Night of Fear, their first single. Top stuff. Another group that I've been getting into recently, and this is a recent purchase. This is a record that I've been meaning to check out for a long time. This is OMD, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark and Dazzle Ships. I had it in my mind for some reason that this was going to be quite an expensive record to buy, and it turned out it wasn't at all. You know, I found it on, I think it was eBay for about a tenner, and I was reading up about it, and this could have come in the greatest list, actually, in terms of the influence it had. An amazing set of influences. Derided at the time, it was seen as being a bit pretentious and a bit, perhaps a bit too experimental, but the list of people who were influenced by it is quite astonishing. OMD. One of the best bands ever to come out of Scotland, and this is Orange Juice and the album You Can't Hide Your Love Forever. Not sure, this might have been the debut. First got to know these guys via a best of CD back in the 90s. Really great, obviously boasting the vocal talents of Edwyn Collins, who found yet another way to do Blue-Eyed Soul. Wonderful stuff on Postcard Records. This one from my mate Sean Whelan, SW Studio Productions. How could you leave out the Pet Shop Boys, one of the best 80s pop duos of all time, and I think one of the best greatest hits bands, really. This is the album Introspective, and still going to this day. A new album out this year, which I've yet to check out. And surely the best band ever to come out of the kind of northeast, Prefab Sprout, and this is the album Jordan the Comeback, featuring the amazing talents of Paddy McAloon, the singer-songwriter. Martin McAloon, his brother, currently treading the boards again all these years later, doing solo shows. I saw him supporting Thomas Dolby recently, and it was amazing to see him. But this is one of the best 80s pop albums of all time, produced by Thomas Dolby, with just some amazing tracks. Looking for Atlantis, the title track, Carnival 2000, you know, wonderful stuff. A couple of people mentioned in the comments on the previous video when I was talking about the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the other punk band that I mentioned, the Ruts, and this is The Crack, which I think was their debut album, and it contains the mighty song Babylon's Burning, one of the best punk songs of all time. And this is one of the first records that I picked up after joining, or after starting to make videos. It was Flipside CT showed it and talked about it. I wasn't aware of it, so I checked it out, and yeah, it's a fantastic album. This bunch, I saw them live back in, would have been in the early noughties at a festival, and they were really good, actually. Again, one of the best synth pop bands of all time. Soft Cell with their incredible Immortal cover of Tainted Love. Mark Almond and David Ball. David Ball later went on to be in The Grid, which is wonderful stuff. Quick shout out to Chris at Dixieland Farm. When he watched my previous video, he said he was floored by the fact that I hadn't included this band, particularly as I've actually written a book about them. So we'll have Squeeze, and I'm showing this. Normally I wouldn't show this because it really annoys me when people say that all you need is this record, because I'm a big fan of the Squeeze albums. But this record, you know, I must admit, it is pretty essential. Take Me, I'm Yours, Cool for Cats, Up the Junction, Another Nail in My Heart, Tempted, Black Coffee in Bed. Different in Tilbrook, just, you know, they were seen as having picked up the mantle from Lennon and McCartney, although they were quite different as songwriters really, but I just think a really original and just a splendid pop band from the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, who again, like Madness, are still treading the boards and still doing really well. They're doing a big arena show at the moment, which is amazing. They've got a really good live band with them now, some young guys with them. There was a very, very passionate defence of Status Quo from one of my commenters in the previous video. I really enjoyed reading that, and they could have come in the greatest video, but I will definitely put them in the best. So this is one of the albums I've always said that you have to have in your collection. If you're a proper, serious record collector, you've got to have this album, or you're not a proper record collector in my book. It's 12 Gold Bars by Status Quo. We do have quite a few Status Quo records, actually, and I need to go back to them. A punk band again, or sort of a punk band, they sometimes get overlooked, I suppose, in favour of the sort of more pure punk, you know, the Sex Pistols and those kind of bands. But the Stranglers really, I think they sort of came first, really, emerging out of that pub rock movement, and a very unique sound with those Dave Greenfield swirly Ray Manzarek keyboards, but mixed with this very menacing, hard-edged kind of quality, driving bass, Hugh Cornwall's great vocals, and they did some really interesting songs, you know, things like Golden Brown, which is in, is it 3/4 or 5/4? Great stuff. This bunch, I wanted to come a bit more up to date, because in the previous video, I think I only went up to the Smiths. So we'll have Supergrass from the 90s, who are by far and away, I think, the best of the Britpop bands. I absolutely loved them. I don't listen to them too much anymore. I think I maybe maxed out on them a little bit in the 90s, and you know, but I mean, those albums are really, really fantastic. You know, Life on Other Planets, Road to Ruin, the second album, In It for the Money. Yeah, great stuff. Great trio with a hidden fourth member and some brilliant songs. How could any video looking at the best British bands of all time not have The Sweet, who really colonised the charts in the early 1970s with a fantastic run of hit singles. Came to a rather unpretty end, really, but you've got these great tracks, you know, Ballroom Blitz, Rebel Rouser, Fox on the Run. Great fun. A bit like Squeeze, I think this bunch often get overlooked, and again, at least a couple of people commented on my previous video, where are 10cc, here they are, their second album. This bunch are among my favourite bands. I've said before that the original soundtrack, their third album, was the first proper pop music I ever heard. I have done a video on that album, and you'll find it in the playlist for my revisiting series. This is the second album, and it's the one that has, I think, you know, the band themselves credit this with being their best work. You've got tracks like Somewhere in Hollywood, The Sacroiliac, Old Wild Men on side one, which is incredibly moving, really. But yeah, just an absolutely brilliant pop band from Stockport, isn't it? Manchester area. And then finally, this bunch were name checked by lots of people in the comments on the original video. XTC, one of the best post-punk bands, and they navigated those waters really deftly. You know, that kind of mixture of, it was sort of new wave post-punk, and at times a mixture of Captain Beefheart and the Beatles, really intriguing, and they evolved over the course of their career. Great songwriters, the two songwriters, Andy Partridge, the main guy, and then Colin Moulding bringing up the rear with his kind of quirky, more Kinks-indebted songs, really. I suppose they were like Captain Beefheart meets the Kinks, a very original cocktail of influences. This is their fourth album, is it, I think? Perhaps the fourth album, The Dead Sea, which has just got some fantastic tracks on it. It opens with Respectable Street, Generals and Majors, the Colin Moulding song, great stuff. XTC. Got to have them in. So there we go, that was the best British bands. Hope you enjoyed it, and maybe I'll be back one day to do my favourites, but that will take a little bit more Dutch courage, I think. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.